So hi everyone. Thanks for joining me for the Intro to E-commerce webinar. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, but before I start, um, if you have any questions, can you please write them in the chat box, and I'll address all of those questions at the end of the hour. So I'll try to keep it between 40 and 45 minutes long so that we have a little bit of time to answer any questions if you have any. All right, so a little bit about me. I'm a web developer at Island Collective. I used to work for myself in Regina, and I built some of the websites for some really cool companies and some really cool artists in the city. So you might have seen Leopold's Tavern's e-commerce website. So the e-commerce part of the website, there's like an online store where you can buy shirts and things like that. All that is built on WordPress. Yeah, and then some artists that I've worked for have been Blake Berglund, for example. You can go and buy his music online as well on the e-commerce store we built together. So I got quite a lot of experience doing those. I've been the chapter co-lead of Canada Learning Code for the past year or so. So we also have a couple of workshops that help people develop their own websites, whether it be with WordPress, and if you want to add Woocommerce to that as a e-commerce solution, or Shopify and things like that. So we do have a lot of workshops if you're interested in doing kind of beginner-friendly introduction to these topics. And yeah, so I work at Island Collective, which is a company that was created about a decade ago by a couple of designers from Zoo, which is a large web development company in Saskatoon. So Island Collective is also in Saskatoon, and it's now owned by Andrew Scott, who is the lead developer there. So we do informational e-commerce websites, web applications, mobile applications, and we have done some pretty amazing projects. I really encourage you to go check them out if you're curious about what's possible with websites these days and web apps. And that kind of brings me to a very easy to the webinar, which is basically what kind of solutions are available for you if you want to start an e-commerce business. So aside from the obvious e-commerce website, there are actually quite a few different solutions, and depending on the business you want to start, you'll have to pick the right solution, and the simple e-commerce website may not be the right one for you. So what we're going to do in this webinar is we're going to start by kind of reviewing all of the different solutions that are available. And then, because I know that a large portion of you will be interested more in the e-commerce website side of things, we're going to spend a little bit of time focusing on how to build an e-commerce website. Yeah, and if you have any questions, as I said, you can type them in the chat box. And there's also my contact info on the first slide right here. So please feel free to send me any questions you have after the webinar is over. So an overview of solutions. I talked about web apps and website and e-commerce websites. So what's the difference? The two is something that you'll probably be wondering if you're trying to build an e-commerce store or an e-commerce business. So a website is kind of like a static pages, or something that serve you static data. So the idea is that there's an admin somewhere, or a group of admins that are creating content, and you are accessing that content, but there is no real way for you to interact with it except to click around, go to different pages, go to different posts or things like that. But you can't, for example, create a new post yourself. create a new product, create a new listing. You can't do any of that stuff. You can't edit anything. You can't delete anything. So basically, it's very static in terms of the user perspective. And so then the web app is where you actually have all that interaction. So where the admin can create a lot of the website or the web app content. But then as a user, you can also add new content, delete content, respond to other users' content. You can be shown content based on information that you've provided. So there's really a really important communication between you and the data that you're seeing. So if I'm giving you very simple examples of both solutions, a website would be an informational website would be your local coffee shop website, where you can see, you go on the website and you see the opening hours and the menu, maybe things like that. And then an example of a web app would be, for example, Airbnb, where you can search for listings, but you can also create new listings. So you can create your listing, put your apartment for rent on there, and the apartments that you're seeing for rent have been listed by other users and not by the admins. So all of the content is pretty much created by the users. So that would be a web app. So the tricky part is that you have web apps that can be included as a part of your website. So for example, if you have a website like your local coffee shop website, and then there's a comment section, then the comment section allows any user to add comments, to view their own comments and things like that. And that would be kind of a mini web app that's integrated within the website. And so the e-commerce side of things also in that situation. So basically, that's why it's a little bit tricky. So we talk about web apps and websites like they're two entirely different things. But nowadays, with all of the software that you can build your e-commerce sites on, these things are basically enabling you to create websites and then integrate small web apps to the website. And so we're going to see what are the possibilities and limitations of these solutions, and it'll hopefully become clearer to you whether you should go and pick a full-on web app or whether you should try and build something as an e-commerce website. All right, so what kind of other solutions do you have? Well, there's mobile applications. Mobile apps can be really great for e-commerce, whether it's the app itself is something that you're selling, whether there's in-app purchases that you can make. So, and there's a lot of other solutions, like, for example, you can also just use a mobile app to develop a revenue for your existing e-commerce website. And then a lot of people are also interested in using the mobile app as their first e-commerce point of sale. So instead of building an e-commerce website, you'll go straight to the mobile app because that's where you think most people will go to purchase your product. And in a way that makes sense because, more than half of the traffic that goes to your website is done through a mobile device. So it kind of makes sense to have this mobile first approach. So when you're thinking about your e-commerce business, you definitely have to think about how mobile is going to play into that. And there are definitely some solutions that are much harder to adapt to a mobile device. So let's see, and to mobile apps, and let's see the different solutions that are available in terms of mobile. So basically, you have kind of also a dichotomy with a little punchline here. You've got the native apps, which are the apps that you can find in the App Store or Google Play Store, things like that. So these apps basically are built only for one type of operating system, or specifically for a type of operating system. And they have to go through a lot of requirements to appear on those stores. And then they generally cannot be published on other stores. You would have to build another app if you wanted to move your app to another type of store. So let's go really quickly through the pros and cons of native apps. Pros, one of the big pros is that you get full access to the device's hardware and OS features, and that means, for example, that you can access the camera or a fingerprint recognition for identification, things like that. So you can really use all of the device's kind of cool possibilities if you're building a native app. You can store data offline, so you don't necessarily need to be connected to the internet to have your native app working. Generally, you have better performance, and you get to be featured and searched for in the App Store, which is a really cool marketing incentive. And then the app, of course, installs itself on your device's home screen. Very interestingly, though, like on iOS devices, you can add any web app to your home screen. So you just have to click a little button, say add to the home screen, and then your app will be there and it will look like a native app for the user. But actually, not many people know that and use that. So having the app automatically installed on the home screen is a pretty cool deal. And then the app store that you've chosen, say the Apple Store, handles all of your purchases for the app. And then, I mean, all the time, every time a user purchases an app or does any in-app purchases, it goes through the App Store. So you don't have to handle any of that side of the business, which is kind of great. And the cons are that they're almost always more expensive to build, even on a single platform. And build costs increase significantly for each new platform that you choose. So that means that, for example, if you're building for iPhone, say it costs you X amount of dollars, and then you decide to build for Android, it'll cost you another X amount of dollars. It doesn't really go down as you develop for more platforms. So it's pretty expensive. And then, of course, your app's compatibility is subject to market penetration of mobile device. So, for example, if you have built something for the iPhone and in 2 years the iPhone is only used by 10% of the population, then you only have access to 10% of the, of the market that you originally intended your app to be for. So in the case of the iPhone, you can only get the app through the App Store, and you have to share your revenue with Apple. So 30% of the revenue generated by your app, either by direct purchasing or through in-app purchases, 30% of that revenue goes directly to Apple. So that's a pretty big chunk. And then app updates have to go through an approval process every time you release the app. And I guess I should talk more about the approval process. Whenever you want to either update or put a new app on the App Store, you go through a very long and it can feel like pretty arbitrary approval process. Where you have to correct your code or, so that it meets certain requirements. And that is very tedious, and especially since you have to do so every time that you want to release an update. So the pendant of the native app is the mobile web app. So basically, a mobile web app is built to work on your browser. So in your browser, it opens in your browser and it uses your browser's capabilities. You can download it. You can use it anywhere from any device. So it's much more flexible. But yeah, the important part is that it uses your browser's capabilities, and we'll see that that can be a limiting factor. So I'll go through quickly the pros and cons. Pros is that you built on a single code base, so it's less costly to produce. And just generally, because it uses web technologies, it's actually less expensive to develop than anything that uses native technology. Then you don't have that many performance issues anymore. So sure, mobile web apps are considered to be slower than native web apps. But we're seeing that gap kind of close progressively. You don't have to, another pro is that you don't have to go through the approval process that I was talking about earlier. Whenever you want to update, you just update, and that's it. And of course, you don't share your revenue with the App Store, which is pretty cool in terms of profits. The cons are that you are limited to the functions available to your device's browser. So for example, remember when we talked about how your native app can have access to your camera and fingerprint recognition? That will most probably not be the case for your web app because your browser can't, of course, access fingerprint recognition. So depending on what you want your app to be doing, this might actually be a pretty limiting factor. Another con is that your app can't be found in the App Store. And so that is kind of a, it doesn't help with your marketing, to put it simply. Most of us, when we're looking for an app, we're going to look in our device's App Store. So if you're not featured there, and if you can't even be found there, then it's going to be harder to reach customers. And then if you're looking to generate revenue, you'll have to set up all the e-commerce side of everything yourself. So instead of having, the App Store collect the payments and then give you 70% of them, so that's a little bit more complicated. And then, so that's kind of the pros and cons of native and versus mobile web apps. And then like the other time, like for websites and web apps, there was also a kind of an in-between. And this one is called the hybrid app. Pros are that you save on development costs and build on a single code base like the mobile web app. But you can still market your app in most of the major mobile app stores, so that's really cool. You kind of get best of both worlds. You can access some, if not all, of the features that are locked out of the browser. And then your purchases are managed by the App Store, which is pretty great. And then the cons are that you still have to go through the approval process of the App Store and the revenue sharing. You can't update instantly, and the performances are still dependent on the browser capabilities. So that's kind of a very quick overview to give you an idea of what's available to you. And I've included a web or native app decision tree on the right-hand side over there. If you do have a project that requires an app, I highly recommend kind of going through this and seeing what's best for you. Okay, moving on. The last solution available is software. I'm just going to touch on this very briefly. So software, as we commonly understand it, is an application that is installed and runs on your computer. So like Word, Microsoft Word, Excel, things like that. So they're very similar to web applications, but live in an entirely different environment, and they're very complicated to build, have completely different programming languages and rules. So I'm just touching on this because often you'll hear of software as a service. And so software as a service basically is a web application that you pay a monthly fee to use. So it doesn't have anything to do with, so it's very, very different from your computer software. So software as a service is actually more of a web application. So think about it that way. And so software, your computer software is actually generally very expensive to build, and it won't be a solution that many people will have to use. I hope it won't be the solution that you need to use, because yes, it's definitely the most expensive thing to develop. So quick conclusion for part one. I've stacked the solutions in the left-hand column and then compared them in terms of costs, possibilities, and then integrated marketing. So these are kind of the three pillars that I think are most important for entrepreneurs to look at. So cost, of course, we all understand why. Possibilities, that's not really a something that you should be thinking about as in should I go for more possibilities or less possibilities? You should really be looking at it this way. Does this have the capacity to do what I need it to do? Yes or no? If it does, then this should be your solution. So in the two examples that we're going to look at, so websites with e-commerce component and then custom web apps. If the website solution fits your requirements, you should start with that. Don't start with something that overshoots and does way more or can do way more than you need, because it's going to be more expensive, and as an entrepreneur you kind of want to go for the less expensive solution that that delivers the results that you need. And then integrated marketing. I put that there because you can see that even if you get a custom web app that has a ton of possibilities, or even if you get like a mobile web app that has a ton of possibilities, marketing is still entirely on you. You won't be featured anywhere. It's not because your website is the best or your custom web app is the best that it's going to all of a sudden be on the front page of everyone's Google search. As an entrepreneur, having developed a really great website or a really great product, you still have to do all of the legwork to bring it to people's attention, so to market it. And I really can't stress that enough, because a lot of people think that if you have a great website, it will appear automatically within a few months. It'll appear in Google searches, but that's very, very dependent on. So assuming that your SEO has been your on-site SEO has been done correctly, the Google search results will depend on a wide variety of factors, and that includes your competitive environment as well. So how many other people are competing for certain search words, your strategy, the efforts you're putting into your social media, for example, your online presence, all of that stuff. So I really want to stress the fact that integrated marketing, there is no marketing available for websites or custom web apps. or readily available for the websites or custom web apps. You have to do it all yourself. So that being said, these solutions are really great, and we're going to look at how to set them up. So setting up an e-commerce website. So I'm going to show you the possibilities that are available with Shopify and Woocommerce. So a couple of notes. We will cover web apps later. So this part is focused for entrepreneurs whose business model doesn't rely on a custom functionality. So it's for entrepreneurs whose business model really fits with these solutions. And then I also want to say that the reason I'm only showing these two solutions is that they are by far the leaders in this sector. They're two very, very different solutions, and there are a ton of other similar services, but these two are definitely the leaders in this area. And when you have a leader, that means a lot of people using it. That means a lot of support, a lot of questions that have already been answered online. So as a kind of a starting entrepreneur in the e-commerce side of things, I would definitely recommend going with one of these two. So first off, Shopify. So this is kind of a long slide. I put all the information in there so that you can go back to it if you want to at a later stage. So Shopify, in a few words, is one of the leading multi-channel commerce platforms designed for small and medium-sized businesses. So it's a really, really cool software that can be set up to create stores across multiple sales channels, and that includes brick and mortar locations. So what that means is that you can have an e-commerce store and then also have a point of sale system where you sell items in a physical location, and you can have your inventory for your physical location and your e-commerce location. You can have those inventories synchronized so that it's much easier for you to run this kind of business. So Shopify currently powers over 243,000 businesses in 150 countries. So again, it's really one of the leaders out there, and that means that you do have a ton of support for if you have any questions with Shopify. Also, it's a Canadian company, which is pretty cool. So it's trusted by really big brands like Tesla Motors, Red Bull, many, many more really large companies. So the pros of Shopify are definitely its ease of use. That's its major pro, and quality support is way up there as well. These ratings are from a study that was done, I believe, in 2017. So these are the major pros. When you're going with Shopify, you're going with a simple to use solution that will give you a lot. Of support. You'll have a really great onboarding process to help you figure it out right out of the box. You have a lot of awesome themes that are very easy to set up. Great community. So everything is super easy. The cons are that it's quite expensive. So you do have a 29, so everything, unless I say Canadian dollars, everything is in US dollars here. So $29 for your basic e-commerce store. So what you don't have included in that is things like gift cards and then third-party calculated shipping rates. So what that means is that you do have access to Canada Post shipping rates, but if you want to be able to show, say, UPS shipping rates, then you'd have to actually pay a lot more to be able to show those rates. So there are a few limitations to this solution. And then a really cool other feature for all of the entrepreneurs, really small entrepreneurs out there who use Facebook a lot, there's a $9 option where you can connect your Shopify site to your Facebook page and then sell on Facebook and chat with your customers in Messenger. The Shopify point of sale system is $49, an additional $49 monthly. So what is the point of sale system, just to be clear? It just means that you have an iPad and you download this Shopify software to your iPad, and then you can use it to check out, do the checkout for customers that visit your physical location. So for $49 you get that software. You don't get the iPad, you don't get a card reader or anything, but you get access to that software that synchronizes to your e-commerce website. So buying hardware such as a card reader, so card reader is like around $100, and then if you want to buy a till, for example, that can cost you a lot more. And anyway, I was looking it up, and a package with pretty much everything you need is about $1,000 US. So $29 for basic services isn't that expensive, but if you need additional functionalities on Shopify, so for example, say you want to create a subscription website where you have, users need to pay to access certain pages, and then you have, I don't know, memberships like silver, gold membership, whatever. You have to pay to actually have add-ons to your Shopify store, and that can be between say $20 and $100 per month for each add-on. So the price can go up really fast depending on the complexity of your store. So there is actually if you go to Shopify, there is something called the Shopify App Store. And remember when we're saying that generally you'll be using a website and then you integrate some web apps, small web apps like your comments and your e-commerce to your website. The Shopify App Store is basically a list of all of the web apps that you can integrate to Shopify. So if you're wondering whether Shopify can support the functionality you're looking for, definitely go to the Shopify App Store and look for it there, and you'll also see the pricing. So the other cons of Shopify are that the POS system, last time I checked, couldn't accept debit over $100. So that might be fine for you. It might not. So that's something to consider. Other con is that the software is not open source, so you can't really leave with the source code and rebuild your website on another server, for example. Everything is hosted by Shopify. They own the code behind your site. They don't own your site, so if you decide to close your account, they can't keep your store open, your e-commerce store open, and sell similar products or sell your products or use your design or whatever. But you can't take any of the code and move it somewhere else. And then Shopify uses its own programming language, which is called Liquid, which might be a little bit daunting at first if you want to do some edits to the files that are available. But it's fairly easy to understand. It's a fairly easy language to understand once you delve into it. So if you're working with a programmer who doesn't know Liquid, they should be able to pick it up really fast. But yeah, there is that side of it where it's like a new programming language, so it can be a little bit daunting. So the conclusion for Shopify is that basically you're paying a higher cost for for a simple solution, for the advantage of it being super easy to set up, very simple to manipulate, and not time consuming for you in terms of managing your site or setting it up. Shopify takes care of all the software updates that you need, of your security certificate, of pretty much everything. And so if you need a very, very simple e-commerce website, then this is probably the solution for you. If you just want to sell things online, ship them through Canada Post, sell a few items online, ship them through Canada Post, have like a pretty limited functionality to your store, so you're literally just selling existing products. You don't need people to modify or demand improvements, or pretty much a very simple e-commerce store. I would highly recommend using Shopify. And then basically, if you want more advanced possibilities, what I recommend is going to the Shopify App Store and checking out if the possibilities are available for you, and if they are, what cost. Okay, so, and then a little side note is that a similar solution to Shopify is BigCommerce. If you're interested, you can look it up, but it's pretty much kind of the runner-up, very similar. So moving on, Woocommerce. Woocommerce is the plugin that integrates to WordPress websites. If you already have a WordPress website, it's super easy to set up. The plugin is very easy to set up. You should be able to get on your way really fast. However, if you do not have a WordPress website, then there are a few things to consider. The software is free. Woocommerce plugin is free, but you will have to pay for a hosting account, which is around $10 a month. So $10 Canadian a month. So it's not expensive at all, but you have to keep that in mind. It's not because the software is free that everything will be free and your store will be free. So the pro of WordPress and WooCommerce is that they're very, very, very flexible. You can create anything you want with WordPress and WooCommerce. And you do have a ton of plugins available to enable you to customize however you want. Plugins, generally, there's a ton of free plugins, so definitely look into those. And then the cost of a paid plugin will be around 50 to 100 Canadian dollars per year. So if you remember, the Shopify plugins or apps, I guess, are more like around like $20 to $100 a month. So WordPress and WooCommerce are definitely the cheaper solution. And it's open source, so you have access to source code. If you want to change your hosting provider, if you want to update your site, you can literally do anything you want. But so the cons to this system is that WordPress is quite complicated to set up and build a website on if you have no previous experience with a content management system. If you do have experience with content management systems, any kind really, you'll see that they're all the same. Shopify is also a content management system. Squarespace is a content management system. They're all super similar. So if you do have that experience already, WordPress will come very easily to you. Otherwise, there is a steep learning curve. So I would really recommend taking a crash course to get you started if you're going to use this option. And then the major con with WordPress is that you will have to do all your updates yourself. And that means going into your website at least once a month to update plugins and themes and the WordPress software to make sure your website is safe. So I'm just going to do a quick security parentheses here. WordPress is known as an unsafe software. So it has this kind of reputation around it. That's based on the fact that there are a lot of attacks on it every year. And I just want to address that really quick. First of all, the reason there are so many attacks that are reported is that WordPress powers over 25% of websites worldwide, which means that they are a huge target, which is why there is a ton of attacks that are reported. And then there is a reason also that there's a significant percentage of attacks that can have negative repercussions. And that is exactly because of this point that I just mentioned, which is that with WordPress, you need to do all of your updates yourself, and that includes updating your plugins. And so if you're not updating your plugins, for example, that might mean that there might be a security flaw that's been identified, and by not updating, you haven't patched the security flaw. So now, not only is there a security flaw, but there is a notice going around the internet saying, be careful, there is a security flaw in this system. So everyone knows about it, and you are leaving it kind of vulnerable. So people don't realize that updating is this important, but even on your computers, when you see updates from your operating system vendor, you should think of them as potential patches against security vulnerabilities and really get on those really, really quick, because otherwise you're pretty much a sitting duck. So that's why that is the one thing that's very important to remember with WordPress. If you do choose this solution, you have to be diligent and make sure that everything is updated regularly. But otherwise, if you do take care of that, you'll be totally fine. We have been hosting or building our websites with WordPress for the longest time, and we don't have any issues. You also have to be careful to use the right hosting provider, because they're a pretty important line of defense against any attacks. So just as a side note, if you are looking for a hosting provider, we use Varial Hosting, which is a company based out of Saskatoon, and they've been wonderful so far. So we definitely recommend them, and I think the cost is about $10 a month for hosting. End of side notes. So the conclusion for WordPress is that you're trading in your time for a better price and more flexibility. So you're paying less, you have a more flexible solution, but you have to put in more time for the setup, and you have to put in more time to update things and keep things running smoothly. Side note is that another similar tool is Magento. It is less used than WooCommerce, so I recommend still going with WordPress and WooCommerce for the reasons that I mentioned before. So payment platforms, taxes, and shipping. Let's go over these really fast. So there are many payment platforms that are available to you, and you should definitely not be processing payments yourself. If you're using Shopify, you're going to use Shopify payments more often than not, because I think there's an additional fee to using any other sort of payment platform. If you're using WooCommerce, definitely use Stripe and PayPal. They're the most used solutions. They are super secure. They're trusted by companies like Twitter and whatnot. So they're really great. Use them, and there is no setup fee. And I think for all payment platforms, there is a 3%, about 3% rate that's taken out of your, and then a fixed cost per transaction around 50 cents or less. But that's the case for all payment platforms. That's how their business model works. Taxes. So taxes can be calculated based on your customer's address on checkout. So for example, you might want to add a different tax for someone living in Alberta, or in the US, for example. It's very simple to set up for both platforms, so don't worry too much about that. It will be very, very simple to set up. Shipping, post-Canada shipping calculation is free for both platforms. However, you may have to pay for plugins if you want to access third-party shipping, such as UPS. So in the case of Woocommerce, it'll cost you around 50 to 100 Canadian dollars per year. If you want to use this service with Shop, you'll probably need to upgrade to a pro account. That's $250 US a month. That's very expensive. So definitely keep an eye out for that if you need to use that. And that's pretty much the conclusion for Shopify and WooCommerce. And just to keep it super simple, if you're picking one of the two platforms, here is what I recommend doing. If you're a very small entrepreneur with uncertain revenue, pick Shopify. And I mean that by saying, if you have a very simple business model and you can use that $29 a month plan, definitely start off with that. And I also want to say that there's a 14-day free trial on Shopify, so take advantage of that. Try and set up your website and see how that works out. You can always move to WooCommerce if you need to later. If you're an established entrepreneur who wants to open a new stream of commerce, consider WooCommerce or Shopify. Either of those can work for you. You'll have to look at how much you're looking to pay with Shopify in terms of apps, if you're having something a little bit more complicated to build. And then WooCommerce, if you already have experience with a CMS, or if you already have a WordPress website, or simply if you're ready to pay someone to build a website for you because you're an established entrepreneur, this might be the solution. So it brings me to the, do you do it yourself or do you hire someone to do it? There are two situations where you should get someone to build your e-commerce site for you. One is that you've got the budget and need to concentrate somewhere else. So not everyone has the time to set up to learn how to do all of this and set everything up. But it is quite a budget. So definitely make sure that you've budgeted for that before you get going. Another reason is that if you want a custom design and most importantly, custom functionality, and you've identified that you cannot create them by yourself using these existing tools and platforms, then you might need to hire someone to create your website or e-commerce website for you. If you do decide to do that, there are a few rules. If you've chosen to go with Shopify, maybe do a 14-day free trial to see if you can go the do-it-yourself route in the end. You might be surprised at how easy it is, and you might want to just do it yourself in the end. If you have chosen Shopify, you can find designers that will put the website together for you as well. So don't think that because it is so simple, you can't find anyone to do it for you. There are definitely designers and developers that specialize in Shopify. Third rule is do not invest in a firm too early on in your project. So the idea behind a website, an e-commerce website, if you're getting someone to build it, is that you should be pretty sure that you're going to make the money back that you invested in your website. So if you pay $5,000 to get a website built, you should get the equivalent value from your sales in the case of an e-commerce website. In case of informational websites, it might be totally different KPIs. But if it's e-commerce, you'd need to get some sales to account for the budget that you put in getting someone to build your website. So maybe you don't have this revenue coming in right now. So maybe you can start with a Shopify website, see if that works for you. And then maybe down the road, if you're growing really fast and you need some new functionalities, maybe you'll just move over to WooCommerce to get something more flexible and adaptable and all those things. But yeah, definitely don't invest before you have the resources to account for that. And then think twice before investing your money in an overseas firm, and that's very, very important for e-commerce because you want to have that trust that is available between you and a firm that you are working with closely and that you can go see, and if anything goes wrong, that you can hold accountable for, especially in the case of e-commerce where you're dealing with financial information. And then number 5, don't overpay for hosting. Unless someone is agreeing to take care of updating and, updating your software and your content and things like that, then there's really no reason to pay more than $10 or $20 a month for hosting. Part 3, the special case of the brick and mortar store. I'm going to skip over this. I don't think it applies to many people, and I see there's not that many people here today. So just really quick, if you do have a brick and mortar store that's already set up and is selling thousands of products, and you don't have a point of sale system set up yet, then this Lightspeed software is a really great software, and it has a good e-commerce component. So if this is your situation where you're selling thousands of products and you need to, first of all, set up a point of sale, a local point of sale, so a software that you can record your sales on, before you do an e-commerce store, and the e-commerce store is kind of a second thought, then this might be a good software for you. All right, and then last part, it's going to be really fast as well. Web applications, building your web app. So if you've decided that you need a web app, that's probably because you want something that's highly customized, and you've looked through the Shopify App Store, and you've looked through WordPress and WooCommerce plugins, and you can't find anything that does what you want, then you probably need to get a web app set up. You're going to have to hire someone to take care of that. So there's really no way around that. And then I've just added some rules here, so some advice for you. First of all, ask for a few different quotes. Try to get to know the team before you commit, simply because these are people you're going to be working for a few months. Working with for a few months. So you want to make sure on the same page, and you have, the reaction time that you want and things like that. And yeah, basically make sure you're hiring the right team. Get a time frame included in the quote, just so you can hold people accountable to that time frame, and make sure you have your product delivered on time. And once you've signed with a firm, you have to trust them. They have a lot of expertise in their area, and they will be giving you the best that they can. So that's kind of the recipe for a really good collaboration. So I kind of went all the way to the end of the hour, but I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box, so I kind of took my time there. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box. And if you don't write at this moment, but you think of them later, please go ahead and email me at jill@weareisland.com. So I'm just going to wait for a second and see if anyone has a question. Nope, doesn't look like it. All right. So I think that's it for me. So thank you everyone for signing in. I hope you got some information out of this, and let me know if you have any other questions after the webinar. Bye.
All right. Well, I'd like to give a huge thank you to Jill for taking some time out of her busy day to share some insights with us. and for making us all a little bit more knowledgeable in e-commerce. I also want to say thank you to all of you who could join us today on today's webinar. And you'll be able to view this webinar on demand on our website within a couple days. Our next webinar is Bookkeeping 101 and is presented by Danielle Hansen of Virtus Group. And registration for that is now open. So you can check your WESC emails or visit our website to register. Bye everyone and have a great afternoon.